I gave a kidney to my husband. Months later, I caught him cheating on me with his secretary. I'm bored with you, he told me. I packed my things in a shopping cart, wrote a letter, and left it on the table. When he read it, he called me 44 times. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story to the end and let me know what city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Catherine, and I'm 61 years old. I never thought at this age I'd be telling a story like this. But here I am, sitting in my small apartment, remembering the day that changed everything. The day I decided to give my kidney to Arthur, my husband of 30 years. It was a Tuesday in March when Dr. Miller gave us the news. Arthur needed a transplant urgently, or he wouldn't live more than 6 months. I remember that moment perfectly because the world just stopped. Arthur was sitting next to me, as pale as the office wall, and I could only think of one thing. I had to save him. There's a waiting list, the doctor explained, but it could take years. Your best option would be a compatible donor from the family. Arthur looked at me with those blue eyes that I had fallen in love with so many years ago. He didn't say anything, but I already knew what I had to do. That same afternoon, I went for the compatibility tests. When the results came back a week later, the doctor seemed surprised. You're a perfect match, Catherine, but I have to warn you that at your age, 61, the surgery carries significant risks. Arthur took my hand. You don't have to do this, my love. We can wait. But I had already made up my mind. Doctor, when can we schedule the operation? The following weeks were a whirlwind of medical preparations, blood tests, x-rays, and consultations with different specialists. Arthur seemed relieved, but also distant. I chalked it up to nerves and the stress of his illness. My sister Helen was the only one who tried to talk me out of it. Catherine, you're crazy. Arthur can get another kidney. You only have one spare. Helen, he's my husband. I love him, I replied. If it were the other way around, he'd do the same for me. She gave me a strange look, as if she wanted to say something more, but she just sighed. I hope you're right. The night before the surgery, Arthur and I stayed up late. I was nervous, not about the operation, but about the possibility of something going wrong and not being able to save him. Are you sure? He asked me for the 100th time. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I answered, stroking his face. We're going to get through this together. He kissed me, but the kiss felt different, cold, mechanical. I thought it was just nerves. The day of the operation, we arrived at the hospital at 6 a.m. Dr. Miller explained the procedure to me one more time. Catherine, the operation will last about 4 hours. Recovery will be 6 to 8 weeks, and you need to understand that you'll live with only one kidney for the rest of your life. I nodded. I understand. Arthur walked me to the prep room. He took my hand and said, Thank you, Catherine. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Those words felt strange. In 30 years of marriage, he had never talked about repaying me for anything. We were a family, a team, but I was sedated before I could think too much about it. I woke up 8 hours later in a pain I had never experienced. It was as if they had torn out a piece of my soul, along with my kidney. The nurse told me everything had gone perfectly and that Arthur was already awake in his room. Can I see him? I whispered, my throat dry. In a few hours, when you're more stable, she replied with a kind smile. I spent that first night alone, hooked up to tubes and monitors, thinking about Arthur. I imagined his relief, his gratitude. I thought about the years we would have together now that he would be healthy. When I was finally able to see him the next day, Arthur was sitting up in bed, looking better than he had in months. The color had returned to his cheeks, and his eyes were shining again. "How do you feel?" I asked, though I could barely stand. "Like new," he answered, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you so much, Catherine." There it was again, that strange formality, as if I were a nurse, not his wife. My recovery was slow and painful. I spent 6 weeks in bed, depending on Arthur for everything. He took care of me, but there was something different in the way he treated me. He was efficient, proper, but cold. He no longer looked at me the way he used to, no longer touched me with tenderness. "You're being a little dramatic about the pain," he said one afternoon when I complained about the discomfort. "The doctor said it's normal." That sentence hurt more than the scar on my side. By the time I could finally walk normally again, Arthur had resumed his life as if nothing had happened. He went back to work, to his routines, to his schedules, but something had changed forever between us. One night, 2 months after the surgery, I found him looking at his phone and smiling. When I asked him what was so funny, he quickly put the phone down. "Nothing important," he said, "just work." But Arthur had never smiled about work, and he had definitely never hidden his phone from me. That night, as he slept, I lay awake thinking about everything that had changed. I had given him my best, literally a part of my body, to save him. But I had a terrible feeling that I had lost something much more important in the process. I had no idea the worst was yet to come. The months following the operation turned into a silent nightmare. Arthur was back to being the vital, energetic man I once knew, but he was no longer the man who loved me. It was like living with a stranger who shared my bed and my table, but had stopped seeing me as his wife. He started working very late. His accounting firm, which had always closed at 5, now kept him busy until 9, 10, sometimes even 11 at night. When I asked him about the long hours, he would get irritated. "Catherine, I lost almost 3 months of work because of the illness. I have to make up for lost time." But I knew that wasn't true. Arthur was a senior partner at the firm. No one was demanding impossible hours from him. One afternoon in June, while I was sorting his laundry, I found a receipt in his suit pocket. It was from an elegant restaurant downtown, the Red Oak Grill. The bill was for $240 for 2 people. The date was from the previous Tuesday, when Arthur had told me he had a work meeting and would just grab a sandwich at the office. My heart started to beat faster. I checked more pockets and found another receipt. This one was from a flower shop, $50 for red roses, purchased last Friday, the same day he came home empty-handed for me. That night, when Arthur got home at 10:30, I showed him the receipts. "Can you explain this?" I asked, my voice trembling. Arthur looked at the papers and sighed, as if I were an annoying child asking silly questions. "Catherine, I took an important client out to dinner. The flowers were for the receptionist. It was her birthday. It's all work." His explanation sounded reasonable, but something in his tone, in the way he avoided my eyes, told me he was lying. "What client?" I pressed. "I don't think you know him. Roger Pemberton. He's new." That night, I called Helen. "Sis, I think Arthur's cheating on me." "Do you have proof?" she asked. "Just a gut feeling and some strange receipts." Helen sighed. "Catherine, maybe you're being paranoid. You just went through major surgery. Your body and mind are recovering." Maybe she was right. Maybe it was my insecurity talking. After all, I had lost weight after the operation. I had a horrible scar on my side, and I felt old and tired all the time. But the signs kept coming. Arthur started showering the moment he got home, something he had never done before. He started wearing new cologne. One I hadn't bought him. His phone was always face down and on silent. One morning in July, Arthur left early for work, saying he had an important meeting. I had an appointment with Dr. Miller for my 6-month post-op checkup. The doctor's office was in the medical center, just 3 blocks from Arthur's office. After my appointment, where the doctor confirmed that my remaining kidney was working perfectly, I decided to surprise Arthur. I thought we could have lunch together like we used to before he got sick. I walked toward his office building, feeling something like hope for the first time in months. Maybe we could reconnect. Maybe I was imagining problems where there were none. But when I got to the building's parking garage, I saw Arthur's car, and he wasn't alone. In the driver's seat was my husband. In the passenger seat was a young, thin woman with long blonde hair. I didn't recognize her at first, but when Arthur leaned over and kissed her passionately, it felt like a knife had been plunged into my chest. I stood frozen behind a concrete pillar, watching the scene that was destroying my world. The woman was laughing. Arthur was stroking her face with a tenderness he no longer showed me. They kissed again, and this time I could see her face clearly. It was Samantha, his secretary. The same 28-year-old woman who had been so understanding during Arthur's illness. The one who had sent me flowers at the hospital after my surgery. The one who always greeted me with a smile when I visited the office. The world started spinning. I put a hand on the pillar to keep from falling. It all made sense now. The late nights, the receipts, the coldness, the distance. My husband, the man whose life I had saved by giving him my kidney, was betraying me with a woman 33 years younger than me. I watched them get out of the car together. Arthur took Samantha's hand, and they walked toward the building's entrance like a normal couple. Like he and I used to walk a long time ago. I managed to get to my car without them seeing me. Once inside, I started to cry with an intensity that scared me. It wasn't just tears of sadness, but of a deep, burning rage and humiliation. I had given my kidney for this man. I had risked my life for him, and he was repaying me by cheating on me with a woman who could be his daughter. I drove home in a daze. When I arrived, I sat in the living room and tried to process what I had seen. How long had this been going on? Had it started before the surgery? During my recovery? That night, Arthur came home at 11 as usual, with a casual smile. "How was the doctor's appointment?" he asked as he took off his jacket. "Fine," I replied in a neutral voice. "Everything's perfect with my kidney." "That's great," he said, and went straight to the shower. I sat in the living room, listening to the water run, knowing he was washing off her perfume, washing away her kisses, erasing the evidence of his betrayal. For the first time in my life, I understood what hatred meant. I wasn't just hurt or disappointed. I was furious. I had sacrificed my body, my health, my well-being for a man who no longer loved me and who had probably never truly valued me. But I still hadn't heard the worst of it. That would come later, when I finally found the courage to confront him. And when I did, his words would be so cruel they would change everything forever. I spent 3 days torturing myself with what I had seen. 3 days watching Arthur act as if nothing had happened, pretending to be the husband he no longer was. Every time he smiled at me, every time he asked how my day was, I felt sick to my stomach. It was like living with an actor who had forgotten he was no longer on stage. On Friday night, Arthur announced he had to work on Saturday. "It's an urgent case," he said, checking his phone. "I'll probably be out all day." That was the last straw. I couldn't pretend anymore. "Arthur," I said in a firm voice, "we need to talk." He looked up from his phone with an annoyed expression, as if I were interrupting something important. "Now? I'm reviewing some documents for tomorrow." "Yes, now." Something in my tone must have caught his attention because he put his phone down and looked at me more closely. "What is it, Catherine?" I sat across from him at the dining room table, the same table where we had eaten breakfast together for 30 years. I took a deep breath and said the words I'd been rehearsing for days. "I know about Samantha." Arthur blinked once, twice. For a moment, I saw a flash of panic in his eyes, but he recovered quickly. "What are you talking about?" "I saw you two in the parking garage at your office on Tuesday after my doctor's appointment." The silence that followed was deafening. Arthur sat motionless, as if calculating what to say, what lie to invent. But finally, his shoulders relaxed, and he sighed. "Well," he said, his voice completely different, cold and distant, "I guess there's no point in pretending anymore." He didn't apologize. He didn't look ashamed. He didn't try to explain. He just confirmed my worst nightmare with the same indifference he might have used to confirm the weather. "Is that all you have to say?" I asked, feeling my voice tremble. Arthur leaned back in his chair and studied me with a look I didn't recognize. It was the look of a stranger evaluating someone he barely knows. "What do you want me to say, Catherine? That I'm sorry, that it was a mistake? Wasn't it?" He laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "No, it wasn't a mistake. It was a decision." His words hit me like a physical slap. "A decision?" "Yes. I decided I don't want to be in this marriage anymore. I don't want to be with you anymore." I couldn't breathe. During all those days of anguish, I had imagined so many scenarios. Arthur begging for forgiveness, promising to end the affair, pleading with me to take him back. I never imagined this absolute coldness. But Arthur, we've been married for 30 years. I saved your life. I gave you my kidney. "And I thank you for that," he said, as if he were thanking a doctor after a routine checkup. "But that doesn't mean I have to be tied to you forever." Tears started rolling down my cheeks. "Tied? Is that how you see our marriage?" Arthur got up from the table and started pacing the room. "Catherine, I'm going to be honest with you for the first time in a long time. I'm bored with you." Those 4 words shattered my soul. Bored. Yes, bored. You haven't aged well. All you do is complain about your surgery, your aches, how tired you are. You don't take care of yourself like you used to. You're not the woman I fell in love with. Every word was a dagger. "Arthur, I'm 61. You're 63. We've both aged." "But I haven't let myself go like you have," he retorted cruelly. "Samantha makes me feel alive again. She makes me feel young. With you, I just feel old and trapped." I stumbled to my feet. "When did this start? Does it matter?" "Yes, it matters. Was it before the surgery, while I was giving you my kidney?" Arthur stopped pacing and looked me straight in the eye. "It started 2 months before I was diagnosed with kidney disease." The world stopped. What? I was already seeing Samantha when I got sick. In fact, I thought about just canceling the operation and letting things run their natural course. I couldn't breathe. But you accepted my kidney? Of course I did, he said with a chilling smile. Why would I die when I had the option to live? But that doesn't mean I wanted to stay married to you. So you used me, I whispered. I gave you an opportunity to do something meaningful with your life, he replied, without a shred of remorse. You should be grateful. The anger I had been holding back for days finally exploded. Grateful? I gave you my kidney. I risked my life for you. And I never asked you to, he yelled back. That was your decision. I never signed a contract saying I would love you forever just because you gave me an organ. His words were so cruel, so calculatedly hurtful, that I was left speechless. This was not the man I had married. This was not the man for whom I had sacrificed so much. Do you love her? I finally asked. More than I've loved you in the last 10 years, he answered without hesitation. That was the final blow. I sank heavily onto the sofa, feeling as if all the energy had drained from my body. I want a divorce, Arthur said, his voice now businesslike, practical. We can do this the civilized way or the complicated way. You decide. Arthur, I said, my voice breaking, we're a family. We built a life together. Catherine, you built a fantasy. I've been living a lie for years. Not anymore. He headed for the stairs, then stopped and turned back to me. By the way, I'm spending the weekend with Samantha. When I get back on Monday, I expect you'll have had time to process all this, and we can discuss the terms of the divorce like adults. I heard him go upstairs. I heard the sound of his suitcase being packed. I heard his footsteps coming back down. I heard the front door close and the sound of his car driving away. I sat there in that empty room, in that house that was no longer a home, processing the magnitude of the betrayal. He hadn't just cheated on me with another woman. He had used me. He had taken my kidney, knowing he no longer loved me, knowing he would leave me as soon as he was healthy. It was worse than an affair. It was a cold, calculated manipulation of my love, my devotion, my very life. But Arthur had made a mistake. He had underestimated the woman he had been married to for 30 years. He thought I would stay here crying, that I would beg for him to come back, that I would accept whatever crumbs of affection he wanted to give me. He had no idea what was about to happen. After Arthur left that night, I sat in the living room until sunrise. I didn't cry anymore. I was out of tears. Instead, I felt a strange coldness, a clarity I hadn't experienced in months. For 30 years, I had been the perfect wife, the one who kept the house spotless, cooked the dinners, organized the social gatherings, smiled and nodded when Arthur made important decisions without consulting me, the one who had sacrificed her own body to save him. But that woman had died sometime during that brutal conversation. In her place was someone with nothing left to lose. On Saturday morning, I started doing something I should have done years ago. I reviewed our finances. Arthur had always handled the money, telling me not to worry about those complicated things. I had been a fool to trust him completely. I opened his laptop, whose password I knew, because I'd used it to send emails when he was sick. I logged into our bank accounts and almost fainted for the second time that week. The savings account I thought held $70,000 had only $12,000. The checking account showed expenses I didn't recognize. Payments to expensive restaurants, a luxury jewelry store, even a hotel on the outskirts of town. The dates of these expenses went back almost a year. Arthur hadn't just been cheating with Samantha for much longer than he'd admitted. He had been spending our savings on her. I kept digging and found something that chilled me to the bone. Arthur had taken out a $20,000 loan against the house 3 months ago. The money had been transferred to an account I didn't recognize. My husband hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. He had been stealing from me. But that wasn't all. In his email, I found exchanges with a divorce attorney. The emails were from 2 weeks ago, when I still believed we had a marriage worth saving. Dear Mr. Whitman, one of the emails read, "My wife donated a kidney to me several months ago. Will this affect my position in the divorce? I don't want her to use that to gain a financial advantage." The lawyer's response was technical and cold. The organ donation does not constitute a marital asset that can be divided. However, it could generate sympathy from a judge. I recommend you document any erratic behavior or irresponsible spending on her part to counteract that narrative. Arthur had been planning this for weeks. While I was recovering from surgery, while I was dealing with the pain and uncertainty, he was already consulting lawyers and planning how to get rid of me. I kept reading and found emails between Arthur and Samantha that made me sick. They didn't just talk about their love, but also their future plans. Arthur had promised her they would be together as soon as he got rid of the dead weight. The dead weight was me. In one particularly cruel email, Samantha wrote, "I can't wait for us to move in together. Do you think she'll make a scene when you tell her?" Arthur had replied, "Catherine is too weak to make a scene. She'll probably cry a little and then accept whatever I offer her. Women her age don't have many options." I closed the laptop and sat in silence, processing everything I had discovered. Arthur hadn't just used me to save his life. He had been planning to destroy mine long before I even suspected something was wrong. But there was something else he didn't know. Something I had discovered during my last visit to Dr. Miller and had been holding on to until I was sure. I went to my room and took a sealed envelope from my jewelry box that I'd been hiding for 2 weeks. Inside were the results of some tests Dr. Miller had ordered as part of my post-op follow-up. The results showed something Arthur was completely unaware of, something that would change everything. But before I used that information, I had to get out of that house. I couldn't be there when Arthur came back. I didn't trust myself not to do something I would regret. I started packing, but not in the way Arthur would expect. I didn't pack fancy suitcases or call a moving company. Instead, I went to the garage and pulled out the old shopping cart I used for grocery runs. The same cart Arthur always criticized, saying it made me look like some classless old woman. Perfect. It was exactly the image I wanted to project. I filled the cart with the essentials: clothes, important documents, a few family photos, and my medications. I didn't want anything he had bought, nothing that had his mark of ownership on it, only the things that were truly mine. As I packed, I thought about all the years I had spent trying to be the wife he wanted. I had made myself smaller to make him feel bigger. I had silenced my voice so his could be louder. I had sacrificed my dreams to support his, and in the end, none of it had mattered. To him, I was just an obstacle on the path to his new life with a younger woman. When I finished packing, I sat down in the kitchen and wrote a letter. Not a tearful, pleading goodbye letter. A letter that would change the course of everything. "Arthur," I wrote in a firm hand, "by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Don't try to find me. Don't call Helen or my friends. Don't come begging me to return. You've made many mistakes in the last few months, but the biggest one was underestimating the woman you've been married to for 30 years. Attached to this letter, you'll find copies of the medical results I received last week. I suggest you read them carefully and then call Dr. Miller to explain the implications. You'll also find copies of all the emails you exchanged with your lawyer and with Samantha. Yes, Arthur, I know everything about your plans, your lies, and your systematic theft of our savings. But the most important thing you need to know is this. The kidney I gave you isn't a long-term match for your system. The tests show early signs of rejection. Dr. Miller wanted to discuss this with you next week, but I asked him to wait until I had processed the information. Your body is starting to reject my kidney, Arthur. In the next 6 to 12 months, you will need another transplant. The irony is perfect, don't you think? You used my kidney to save yourself, thinking it gave you the gift of a new life with another woman. But it turns out what I gave you was just borrowed time. I hope you've enjoyed these months with Samantha, because when she finds out you need another transplant, that you'll have to go back on the waiting list, that you could die waiting for a compatible donor, we'll see just how deep her love is. Don't look for me. Don't call me. Don't beg me. You had your chance to be honest with me, to treat me with respect, to value what I sacrificed for you. Instead, you chose cruelty and betrayal. Now you'll have to live with the consequences. Catherine P.S. The $12,000 left in our savings account has been donated to the National Kidney Foundation in honor of all the donors who are truly appreciated by their recipients. I sealed the letter and left it in the center of the dining room table, along with copies of all the documents I had found. I took my cart and walked to the door. On the threshold, I paused for a moment and looked back at the house where I had spent the best years of my adult life, where I had believed I was loved and valued. But I no longer felt sadness, just a strange sense of freedom. I closed the door and started walking down the street, pulling my cart like a homeless old woman. A few neighbors looked at me with curiosity, but I didn't care. Arthur would be embarrassed when he found out this was how I had left, that he had reduced his wife to walking through the neighborhood with a shopping cart. But that humiliation would be nothing compared to what was coming next. As I walked toward the bus stop, my phone started ringing. I knew who it was without looking. Arthur had come home and found my letter. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. 44 missed calls from Arthur in the first 2 hours after he found my letter. Every time I declined the call, it rang again immediately. The desperation in his persistence gave me a bitter satisfaction. I had taken refuge at my younger sister Helen's house. She lived in a modest apartment, 40 minutes from my old home, in a neighborhood Arthur had always considered too ordinary to visit. "Catherine, what's going on?" Helen asked when I showed up at her door with my shopping cart and tear-swollen eyes. "Why aren't you answering your phone?" "Because Arthur is finally experiencing the consequences of his actions," I replied, stepping inside and leaving the cart by the door. Helen frowned. "What are you talking about?" I sat on her sofa and told her everything. The affair with Samantha, the brutal conversation on Friday night, the documents I'd found on his computer, and finally, the bombshell I'd left in my letter. "Wait," Helen said when I finished. "Are you telling me his body is rejecting the kidney you gave him?" "Exactly. The tests show early signs of chronic rejection. Dr. Miller says it happens in about 20% of transplants, especially when there's a big age difference between the donor and recipient. Helen was quiet for a moment, processing. And Arthur doesn't know any of this? He had no idea. I was going to tell him this week, after consulting with more specialists, but when I discovered his betrayal, I decided he could find out the same way I found out about his, by surprise. My phone rang again. This time it was a text message, not a call. "Catherine, please pick up. We need to talk. This is important." I deleted it without replying. Helen sat beside me. "Sis, I know you're furious, and you have every right to be, but don't you think you should talk to him? If he's sick again..." Helen, I interrupted. "That man used me. He used me to save his life, knowing he didn't love me, knowing he'd leave me as soon as he was healthy. He stole our savings to spend on another woman. Why should I care about his health now?" "Because you're a better person than he is," Helen answered softly. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was a better person than Arthur. But I was no longer the same woman who had donated her kidney without a second thought. That woman had been naive, trusting, willing to sacrifice herself for someone who didn't value her. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was an unknown number. "Catherine?" a female voice asked when I answered. "This is Sandra from Dr. Miller's office. The doctor needs to speak with you urgently about your test results." "I already spoke with him last week," I replied. He explained everything about the kidney rejection. There was a pause. "Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Your husband, Arthur, came into the office this afternoon with a copy of the results you gave him. The doctor needs to clarify a few things with you." My stomach dropped. "What kind of things?" "I'd prefer you speak directly with the doctor. Can you come in tomorrow morning?" I agreed to meet Dr. Miller at 9. After I hung up, I stared at the phone with a strange sense of unease. "What's wrong?" Helen asked. "I'm not sure. The doctor wants to see me tomorrow, Mike." I barely slept that night. My phone kept ringing until after 2 a.m. Arthur had stopped calling directly, but was now using different numbers. In some messages, he sounded desperate. In others, furious. "Catherine, this is ridiculous. I'm your husband. We have to talk. Why are you doing this to me? I never thought you were so vindictive." I called Dr. Miller. He says, "There are things you don't understand about the results. Please answer." That last message worried me. What things didn't I understand? The next morning, I arrived early at Dr. Miller's office. The nurse showed me into his office immediately. "Catherine," the doctor said as I entered, "I need to clarify something very important with you." I sat across from his desk, my anxiety growing. "What is it, doctor?" "Your husband came in yesterday with a copy of some medical results he said you gave him. Results that supposedly showed his body was rejecting the kidney you donated." I nodded. "Yes, those are the results I received last week." Dr. Miller shook his head slowly. "Catherine, those weren't Arthur's results. They were yours." The world stopped. "What?" "The tests I gave you last week were for your post-donation follow-up. They showed some elevated markers in your remaining kidney function, not problems with Arthur's transplanted kidney." I couldn't breathe. "But you told me." "I told you that we needed to monitor your kidney function carefully because donating a kidney at your age presents certain long-term risks. I never said anything about transplant rejection." The room started to spin. So, Arthur is fine. The kidney you donated to him is functioning perfectly. His latest tests from 2 weeks ago are completely normal. I sat frozen in the chair, processing the magnitude of my mistake. Not only had I misinterpreted the results, but I had used that incorrect information like a nuclear bomb in my letter to Arthur. "Doctor," I said, my voice trembling, "what exactly do my results mean?" Dr. Miller leaned back in his chair with a serious expression. "It means your remaining kidney is working harder than it should to compensate for the loss of the other. It's something we expected, but in your case, it's happening faster than normal." "Is it serious?" "Not immediately, but you'll need constant monitoring and possibly medication in the future. Kidney donation, especially at your age, carries long-term risks for the donor." "Did Arthur know this when he accepted my kidney?" Dr. Miller hesitated. "The risks to the donor are discussed in the pre-op consultations. Both you and Arthur were present at those meetings." I vaguely remembered those appointments. Arthur had asked a lot of questions about his recovery, about the transplant success rates, about his prognosis. I had been so focused on saving him that I had barely paid attention to the risks to myself. "Doctor," I asked finally, "when Arthur came in yesterday, what exactly did you tell him?" He was very upset. He said his wife had given him incorrect medical information and that he wanted to know the truth about his condition. I explained to him that the transplanted kidney is working perfectly and there are no signs of rejection. How did he react? He looked confused and angry, very angry. I left the office in a state of shock. I had not only made a terrible mistake, but now Arthur knew I had lied in my letter. He knew I had tried to make him believe he was dying when he was actually perfectly healthy. My phone rang the moment I stepped out of the building. "Catherine," Arthur's voice was ice cold, "you just made the biggest mistake of your life." "Arthur, I can explain." "There's nothing to explain. You tried to make me think I was dying. You made me spend the worst night of my life thinking I'd have to go through all that again. I thought you lied. You deliberately gave me false medical information to torture me. That's sick, Catherine. Sick and cruel." Tears started to stream down my face. "Arthur, I misunderstood the results. It was a mistake." "A mistake? Was it also a mistake to steal the $12,000 from our savings account?" My heart sank. "How do you know about that?" "Because I went to the bank this morning. You wanted to humiliate me, right? You wanted me to be broke while I dealt with the idea of dying." "It wasn't like that. Catherine, you just proved you're exactly the kind of person I thought you were. Manipulative, vengeful, and willing to lie about life and death matters to hurt someone." The line went dead. I stood on the sidewalk, trembling, finally understanding that I had destroyed any chance of getting out of this with dignity. In my attempt to get revenge on Arthur, I had ended up becoming the villain of the story. But what I didn't know was that Arthur had also made a mistake, an error that would soon come to light and change everything once again. 3 weeks after my disastrous escape, I had settled into a small routine at Helen's place. I'd found a part-time job at a local bookstore, a simple job that allowed me to rebuild my life, one step at a time. I had stopped checking my phone obsessively. I had stopped hoping Arthur would call to apologize. What I didn't expect was the call I received on a Tuesday afternoon. "Catherine, this is Rebecca Morrison, a divorce attorney. Your husband hired me to handle your divorce." My stomach tensed. "I understand." I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss the terms of the separation. There are some complicated matters we need to address. What kind of matters? There was a pause. I'd prefer to discuss it in person. Can you come to my office tomorrow at 2 p.m.? That night, Helen tried to calm me down. It's going to be fine, Catherine. You're entitled to half of everything, no matter what happened. But I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Arthur was smart, manipulative, and now he had ammunition against me. I had lied about medical results. I had taken money from our joint account. A good lawyer could use it to paint me as an unstable, vindictive wife. Rebecca Morrison's office was downtown, in a sleek building that screamed money. The lawyer was a young woman, probably Samantha's age, dressed in an expensive suit with a cold professional smile. Catherine, she said, gesturing for me to sit. My client has made some serious allegations against you. What kind of allegations? He says you provided him with false medical information with the intent to cause emotional distress. He also alleges that you stole money from joint accounts. I took a deep breath. I can explain both of those situations. I'd love to hear your version, Rebecca said, but her tone suggested she had already made up her mind about my credibility. I explained everything: the confusion with the medical results, my emotional state when I discovered the affair, the donation of the money to the Kidney Foundation. Rebecca took notes without showing much expression. I understand you've been through a difficult time, she said finally, but my client's actions during the marriage do not justify providing false medical information. That could be considered emotional abuse. Emotional abuse? I repeated in disbelief. Your client had an affair for over a year. He used me to save his life, and he spent our savings on another woman. And I'm the abuser? Catherine, infidelity is painful, but it's not illegal. Providing false medical information to cause psychological distress could have more serious legal consequences. I fell silent, understanding that this meeting wasn't a negotiation. It was an intimidation. My client is prepared to be generous, Rebecca continued. He is offering to pay you $25,000 and allow you to keep your personal car. In return, you would waive any claim to the house, retirement accounts, and other marital assets. $25,000, I said, my voice choked. We were married for 30 years. I gave him a kidney. The organ donation was voluntary and does not constitute a divisible marital asset, Rebecca replied, as if she had memorized the line. I need time to think about it. Of course, but I must warn you that if this offer is rejected, my client is prepared to proceed with a lawsuit for emotional abuse. That could result in you receiving nothing and possibly facing criminal charges. I left that office feeling completely defeated. Arthur had turned my moment of pain and confusion into a weapon to destroy me financially. He was brilliant in his cruelty, but the universe, it seemed, had other plans. 2 days later, while working at the bookstore, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Catherine, it's Samantha. I froze. Samantha? Yes, Arthur's secretary. I need to talk to you. It's important. I don't think we have anything to talk about. Please. Her voice was trembling, almost desperate. Just give me 5 minutes. It's about Arthur. There are things you need to know. An hour later, we met at a small cafe on the edge of town. Samantha looked very different from the confident, radiant woman I had seen in Arthur's car. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and she had deep, dark circles. Thank you for coming, she said, as I sat across from her. "What do you want, Samantha?" She took a deep breath. "Arthur left me." I couldn't help a small, bitter smile. "So? I thought you should know. I thought maybe it would give you some satisfaction to know that your plan worked." "My plan?" Samantha looked at me, confused. "The letter you wrote him, about the kidney rejection." "Samantha, that information was wrong. Arthur is perfectly healthy." "I know. He told me after he went to the doctor, but the damage was already done." "What do you mean?" Samantha fidgeted with her coffee cup. "When Arthur got your letter, he came to my apartment in a panic. He was crying, saying he was going to die, that he'd need another transplant. He asked me to marry him immediately so we could be together for whatever time he had left." "And what did you say?" "I told him I needed time to process it." Samantha looked me straight in the eye. "The truth is, I got scared. It's one thing to have an affair with a 63-year-old married man when he's healthy and successful. It's another thing entirely to commit to someone who might die soon and need intensive medical care." I felt a strange mix of disgust and satisfaction. "When he found out you'd misunderstood the results, he came to confront me," Samantha continued. "He was furious. He said I was an opportunist, that I only cared about him when it was convenient. He yelled that if I really loved him, I wouldn't have hesitated for a second to marry him when I thought he was dying." "And was he right?" Samantha nodded, tears in her eyes. "Yes, he was right. I don't really love him. I like the idea of being with someone successful, someone who would take me to expensive restaurants and buy me nice things. But when I thought I'd have to take care of him while he was dying, I realized I'm exactly the kind of person he says I am." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I wanted you to know that even though your medical information was wrong, your letter revealed who all of us really are. Lee, Arthur found out I'm not the loving woman I pretended to be, and I found out that he is exactly as cruel and calculating as you always said." Samantha stood up to leave, then paused. "There's something else. Arthur is having problems at work. Apparently, he spent some client money on our dates. Not a lot, but enough to get him in trouble with the Board of Accountancy. He could lose his license." After Samantha left, I sat in the cafe for a long time, processing everything I had heard. My letter, though based on incorrect information, had achieved something I never expected. It had revealed the true nature of everyone involved. That night, I called Rebecca Morrison. "Catherine," she said when she answered, "I hope you've considered our offer." "I have," I replied, "and I reject it. I'm going to fight for what's mine." "Ma'am, I warned you about the consequences of—" "Rebecca," I interrupted, "I think your client has more to lose in a long legal battle than I do, especially if certain ethical matters come to light during the discovery process." There was silence on the other end of the line. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the misuse of client funds. I'm talking about an accountant who could lose his professional license. I'm talking about a man who has a lot more to hide than a grieving wife who made a mistake." 3 weeks later, Arthur agreed to a divorce settlement that gave me half of all marital assets, including the house. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of his cruelty, but there were no more legal threats either. I sold the house immediately. I couldn't live there with all those memories. With the money, I bought a small but bright apartment near Helen and put the rest in a retirement account. Arthur lost his accounting license 6 months later. It turned out he had been borrowing from client accounts for years to fund his lifestyle and his affair with Samantha. He had to file for bankruptcy and eventually moved to another state. Samantha got a job at another accounting firm. I saw her once at the grocery store several months after the divorce. She looked older, more tired. When our eyes met, neither of us said anything. We just acknowledged each other as two women who had learned hard lessons about love and betrayal. As for me, a funny thing happened in the months following the divorce. My kidney function, which had been declining according to my post-donation tests, began to stabilize. Dr. Miller said it was likely the result of reducing my stress level. Chronic stress can have a profound effect on organ function, he explained during one of my follow-up appointments. Now that you've removed the main sources of stress from your life, your body is healing. It was ironic. I had given my kidney to save Arthur, worrying that my sacrifice would endanger my own health. But it turned out that the thing that was really damaging my health was the marriage itself. Today, 2 years later, I'm sitting on my small balcony, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise. My life is simpler now, smaller in some ways, but infinitely more peaceful. I work at the bookstore. I read more books than I have in decades, and I've taken up painting again, a hobby I gave up when I married Arthur. Helen and I are closer than ever. Some nights, when the ache on my side, where the scar is, bothers me, I think about Arthur. I wonder if he ever regrets what he did, if he ever truly understands what he lost. But most of the time, I don't think about him at all, because I finally understood something fundamental. The greatest gift I ever gave him wasn't my kidney. It was his freedom when I decided to leave. And that's a gift he can never return, steal, or take away from me.